Welcome to Leadership in Tech, a bi-weekly podcast series on software engineering and product development. I'm your host, Pradeep Yogi, a senior engineering leader with more than a decade of senior leadership experience in public and PE-backed tech companies. The views expressed by me or my guests are not the views of my employer or those of my guests' employers. Take a listen, share, subscribe, and comment. Hello, welcome to Leadership in Tech. This is a new episode. My guest here is Aggarwal. He has a very long track record of being an executive in software development and product management. Amber and I go back about 20 years or so when we worked at Install Shield. Amber, why don't you introduce yourself and give a little more of a detailed intro?
Yeah. No, thank you, Pradeep. So myself is Aggarwal. I work at SmartLink as SVP of Engineering and Technology. I've been with SmartLinks for a little over a year and a half. Before SmartLinks, I was a VP of Engineering at Sure Payroll, where I worked for around 7 to 8 years. Sure Payroll is a subsidiary of Paychex, and before that, worked at companies like Savo Group and Install Shield, where Pradeep and I met and worked for quite a few years. So over the course of last 20 plus year, my focus has always been, software development, engineering, buildings, teams, software engineering and development teams. And that's what I've been doing for many, many years and done that very successfully at Install Shield, Savo. Sure Payroll was a very good run for me where, when I started at Sure Payroll, the company revenue was around 45 million dollar, and when I left it was around 125 30 million dollar, and trying to repeat the same success at SmartLinks.
Fantastic. So you kind of introduced yourself by saying how you grew up the ranks. So was it by design that you ended up in a senior management role, or what actually led you from where you were as a lead and an architect into a director, VP, and SVP role?
Well, when I started my career, I was happy with being a software developer, getting my hands on. I never thought that I'll become, VP or a director or a SVP or a CTO at a given company. But, my passion for technology kind of helped me grow into this role. So I'm a problem solver and I take a deep dive into every problem that I solve. As a result of which, it doesn't take me a lot of time and effort to become a subject matter expert in the product or the technology I'm working on. Now, one other thing which I believe helped me grow into this was my obsession with customers. So when you mix the customer needs and requirements into the problem, into how you solve them from the technology perspective, you just bring a very different angle to it. And I believe as I started doing that more and more, my visibility into an organization continued to grow, and slowly I was kind of running the entire product division at different companies, and that led me into this role as well.
Fantastic. Now, in terms of how you lead an organization, what is your unique style of leading and managing?
Yes, so I think there are a couple of things that are very important for me. First of all, I lead by example, where I am involved very closely with the leadership of the engineering team. I'm working very closely with them and trying to understand the whys and hows of the problem they are solving. The why is important because that leads to the how. And second important thing is from me is accountability, where I want to make sure that our team members are delivering the right amount of software, the quality that we need in front of our customers. Like I come from payroll background, worked at Sure Payroll for 7 years. So there was never there is not a room for error in the payroll space. You cannot go down and you cannot make mistakes. And those are the things that are very important. So lead by example, be customer obsessive, and also hold the team accountable and make sure we are constantly delivering value in front of our customers. So those are a couple of examples that I always keep in front of my leadership style as when I lead an organization.
Fantastic. Now, given that experience that you have built, where you are leading a no-fail system, right? Like it can't go down, it can make errors, people have to get paid, right? So from that, again, healthcare is not a, again, a no-fail system, right? It can make mistakes and stuff. So based on all this and also prior experience, are there any myths in leadership or management that you've perhaps uncovered?
Yeah. So I think generally speaking, leadership is all about execution. Sure, you can set the vision, you can set motivated people, you can lead by example, you can give a lot of good examples about how Bezos operate or how Elon Musk operate, but end of the day, it all comes down to execution. So, so in my opinion, leadership is not all about talking big plans, laying out the foundation or the vision of a company, but it is also going and executing it. And I believe that's probably the myth where, okay, you're sitting in some corner office and driving the vision and being a leader by talking about big picture, but at the same time you have to execute, you have to deliver. And how do you deliver? How do you deliver incrementally with small teams? And you're constantly putting the ROI in front of your stakeholders, in front of your team members, and also delivering value to your customers. So a combination of leadership and management is what makes you a complete leader, in my opinion. You can't be just only a leader, but you have to be an executioner. And Elon Musk is a perfect example, in my opinion. And same as Jeff Bezos. So if you think about Jeff, he worked tirelessly. He listens. He has a 6-page. He came up with the whole idea of 6-page document. So if you have a great idea, write a 6-page about it. And a lot of time it's hard to write a 6-pager, and a lot of ideas probably get died down when somebody's writing a 6-page document. And Elon Musk, on the other hand, is a hardcore executioner. We all know the stories of him sleeping on the Tesla factory floors and executing. So I believe the myth is leadership is all about talks. It's not. It's also about execution, the management, and how you get stuff done.
Okay, great. So you mentioned execution as being key. So now that means to a certain extent you're hands on, right? I mean, as in like probably very hands on. And almost every successful manager or executive ends up being hands on. Now, what does hands on mean for you? Like when you
Mm-hmm.
manage in a hands on way,
Mm-hmm.
I'm making the assumption you are pretty hands on based on
Yes. Yes.
so what does it mean for you when you are hands on with your group?
Yeah. So what does that mean for me being hands-on? I don't write code. It has been many years since I've written code, but that does not stop from me for that does not stop me from delving into the code. Going into the Git repo and looking at the code. But if I have to scale myself like higher, one of the things I like to do is planning. So for example, when we are building on a feature that's going to get delivered in few weeks, I will love to see a plan of how we're going to build the feature. What are the various milestones along the time frame we're going to deliver to our customers, and what does the success looks like. So I think having that plan from the product side, from the architecture side, leaves a very clear path for the teams that are going to work on it to understand how they're going to go from point A to point B. Now, a lot of time, I've seen companies do, in the name of agility or sprints, they lack that planning, and they're kind of always changing their path. So after 1 week, after one sprint, 2 sprints, they have not delivered any value, and then they say, oh, we found something new. Now, the upfront planning kind of helps reduces that unknowns and provide a clear path to the team. So I think that's where I go into the detail with the team, where team comes back after spending some time planning the path from the product perspective, from customer perspective, and technical perspective, and present that to me along with other stakeholders. And then we say, okay, you know what, this makes sense, or here is a changes from the scalability perspective, performance perspective, why we are putting a grid. For example, why we are putting a grid which have so many different options when a customer has only 5 records to see, actually. So we try to kind of put all those things up front. Now you can say, Pradeep, that's a waterfallish approach. It can be waterfallish approach to some extent, but that's where I think we have to find the right balance by not spending too much time planning, but also not avoiding planning, because at some point of time you'll pay the price for doing that.
Absolutely.
So that's where I believe I'm hands on. And then as we start executing, over the course of time, we have moved away from agility or a 2 week sprint, more like a shape up, development strategy, which Basecamp initially rolled out, where instead of having 2 week sprints or 3 week, we are looking at like a milestone. Okay, milestone number one will be done in 5 to 6 weeks, and we go and hit that. That gives the small team uninterrupted 5 to 6 weeks with the checks and balances somewhere in the middle. So this way, we are not putting a gun on the teams that they have to get stuff done in 2 weeks. Because in my opinion, without delivering any value in 2 weeks, it's
Yeah.
just like putting pressure on the team that they have to get done in 2 weeks actually. So overall, that's how I operate: deeply vested, but still fly at the high level and making sure we are doing a good job planning and then executing.
Great. The shape up, that's something that's very interesting. How do you exert control? Say you have a project or a product vision that takes, say, 6 months or a year to execute, and you have these milestones, the shape of milestones. How do you know that a milestone is going to be achieved? How do you
Yes.
manage that?
So I think like that's a very good question, Pradeep, actually. So if you have like a 6 month, 8 month goal, first of all, we don't know what does that mean: 6 month, 8 month, 9 month, right? So there is something that of value that we want to bring in front of our customer, right? What does that mean actually? What is the value? And I think that's where product, customer facing team, engineering needs to have a very healthy discussion and say, what problem are we solving actually? And how much of a problem are we going to solve? So in my opinion, that needs to be very clearly defined and understood. The like as I always say, the world is choking on features, right? There are a lot of features, but only few percentage of features ever get used actually. So in my opinion, you have to understand what problem we are solving and what value it will bring to a customer, and then you kind of take that backward. So then you take backward from the engineering side. In some cases, you might have to build the plumbing, and that plumbing might not be visible to a customer, so you might have to spend few weeks building that pipeline or the basic architecture, and then you can build a feature in front of a customer. But it goes back to the principle of agility. You build something which a customer can use. They might not get everything, but they get some value or most of the value out of it. The world is moving away from MVP nowadays to MSP, most sellable product.
Yeah,
Uh, so so I think that's the approach we take. Now in some cases it might not be 6 week, 8 weeks of shape up iteration. It might be a little bit longer, but ultimately it brings a lot of clarity, of what value we're going to put in front of customer, what it will take to get that done. And then and at some point of time we need to take a pause also, because we need to understand how people are using that feature. And if that's working for customer and they don't need anything beyond it, maybe we pivot. I don't know if there is always a value in completing the entire thing. So 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 again, this goes back to what we discussed. Planning, understanding the need of a customer, the value proposition we are offering, how much money we can make, because money is important part. It
understood.
will this help in retention, will it help in growth? So keeping all that things into consideration, we decide what needs to be built actually, and then we go and build it, but not in 2 week sprint, but in a very well defined milestone, which is very well planned and then executed.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. Now, I'm sure you work with a lot of senior engineering folks, people that are architects or principal engineers, as well as directors and leaders, right? So, and sometimes there might be difference of views of how to build
Mhm.
something, how to go about achieving a goal. So, how do you build cohesion in your group?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a very good question. When you have a lot of smart people in the room, there is always going to be conflict. And I do believe, the whole idea of writing your thoughts, your vision, and then kind of expressing that does flush out a lot of unknowns, and assumptions out. Because when you're writing a 2 page, 3 page, 4 page document on the architecture and the features and the milestones, I think you're thinking very differently than when you're just talking about stuff, right? Or when you just start writing code randomly and say, okay, we're going to get this thing done. Oh, it's not, it's going to take another sprint. Now it's going to take another sprint. Oh, we missed something, and it's going to take another sprint. So in my, the way I operate is has to be well documented. Now that doesn't mean like you're writing a 200-page document. It means you're putting your thoughts from the product side, from the product team members and your engineering, and then you're kind of sharing it with other folks actually. And I think that takes a lot of, as I said, like a lot of things out, and people are clearly able to understand it. So I've been trying to see if I can follow what Amazon does, where they have bring people in the room and they're all reading about this. We are a small company, but I think we're getting good at this, and that takes a lot of fluff out actually, in my opinion. And the junior engineers or the other developers can work closely with them, and there is always going to be some disagreement that do we need this level of complexity at this stage. And I think those are good questions, and my theory is that we should always remove complexity. We should always keep it very simple, because from the customer perspective, from the technology perspective, but you know when you remove complexity and make it simple, you're also you're also building a more complicated solution. So I think we find the right balance, uh, and then we commit to it basically. So I think that's how we operate. The senior engineers have a lot of, they are enabled to execute, uh, but then there are certain basic foundational principle operationalization of a feature, right? If a customer is facing a problem, how do we know about it, and how do we fix it? If a service goes down, how do we know about it and how do we fix it? So I think we keep those security compliance, so we keep those basic artifacts or the foundational pieces always in our architecture and design, so that when we hand it our feature to our customers, we can measure it, we can monitor the success of it, and also iterate on it. So I think that's how a senior engineer operate. And majority of the time, I believe by having these attributes well defined upfront
Yeah,
leads to less friction overall.
fantastic. That's great. And just as a curious follow up, do you do this only within the engineering group or do you include product people in
So
the
so
write
yeah.
up slash discussion?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. The way we work is we are kind of divided into business domains actually.
Mm.
So and each business domain has product and engineering folks. So we work as like one team. So I work very, very closely with our chief product officer, and the domain is owned by a product manager, sometimes director of product, and then there is a tech lead or a director of engineering, and that's how we operate. Not every domain has that seniority, but we have big domains with multiple teams, and a senior product leader and an engineering leader working as the owner of that. So that has helped us kind of work in a much better organized fashion, and also led to smaller teams actually, right? Because end of the day, if you have too many domains, you have too many people. If you have a bigger domain, you're
Yeah,
kind of organizing. So at SmartLinks, we have a workforce management domain, um, which is responsible for scheduling, time, and attendance. And then we have a human capital management domain, which is responsible for payroll, um, and benefits. And then we have an architecture domain, which is responsible for best practices, uh, common standards across all our features that we build. And then we have a DevOps team. So we've kind of tried to minimize the number of domains, so that we are not stretched thin, and we don't have to hire a lot of people. So that's how we operate. So but product is very, very deeply involved, especially as part of the shape up the early phases of planning. Product owns a lot of those things in partnership with the engineering team, but we also try to make sure we're not distracting everybody else, because we may or may not do that particular feature once we understand the cost and how much time it will take and what the ROI it is. So there is a separate small product team along with some tech leads working from the engineering side to calculate the cost of building and the ROI piece, which they're already always ahead of the game actually.
yeah,
So that's how we are structured. But product is the heartbeat of the whole domain.
absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you for providing that insight into how you organize and operate. Now, switching gears a little bit, what do you what approach do you take to balancing technical decisions with broader business goals? Is the approach that you take of lining up product and engineering into domain specific units helping you with that, or more specifically, my question is within an engineering team itself. Sometimes there is a desire to build things very elaborately, right? Like for perfection or whatever.
Yeah,
There is also a date you want to meet, right? Like,
yeah,
how do you manage those broader goals of
yeah,
business and revenue with building the best solution or someone having an idea of building things a certain way?
yeah. So I think that's a very good question. I've seen a lot of engineering team get caught up into building a perfect solution, and then they will just keep on spinning their wheels on it until, and then release it, and then they find, like, you know what, there is nobody using it, right?
Yeah,
So so we have to be, anybody has to, as a software SaaS company, has to be very careful. As I said, like, the world is choking on feature.
yeah,
Having a feature out does not really mean that it's going to get adopted or used a lot. It might be another check mark or a item in your marketing brochure. So I think that's where our product team comes in, where they are responsible for doing a much bigger job of figuring out the value proposition of that software, actually, and how much, what should we build. And earlier I gave an example of grid, actually, right? If there are only going to be 5 rows in a grid, then why have the idea of building a complicated grid? Maybe an HTML table might be good enough, you know. So, and same thing with the architecture also, like, you can just run that as Azure function in a lot of times, and you might not need a lot of complexity behind it, like caching and other things, or maybe just need caching and you don't need anything else if the data is never going to get refreshed. So I think we have to be, like, from the engineering side and the product side, we have to be very careful on the bets we are making and how big of a bet it is. Because if you're making too big of a bet, and it's going to take a lot of time to understand the value of that bet and what we're going to get out of the bet, then you're putting a lot of expensive people working on that and you're missing out something else. So, and I think this is exactly where agility comes along, because a lot of people have forgotten the foundational principle of agility, where people are so much focused on sprints, and other things, and scrum ceremonies and all that stuff. But the whole idea was, what can we do and show it to the customer very quickly and get their input. Now, we sell to enterprise customer. A lot of our customer are enterprise customer. Some of them have like few thousand employees, and some of them have few hundred employees. So we always, when we build something, we always release our features to a smaller audience and vet it out with them and understand, and then we expose it to a broader audience. Now, a lot of time, being an enterprise customer, selling to enterprise customer, that does not mean that every feature is going to get used by everybody, right? So, but that's how we try to minimize the amount of stuff we have to build by putting that in front of customer, and we do involve them early on to seek their input. So, for example, we've been working on the AI driven bot that can answer a lot of their questions.
Mhm.
Who filled my last 20 shifts and never took a day off, for example. So instead of having a UI or a report, maybe a bot can answer that question. But, since this, so we are kind of exposing that to some of our customers, so that they can see the value of this, and they can avoid writing a report or going to a view. And then we slowly will launch it across a much bigger audience, actually. So that's the approach we have taken, and it has worked out well. Are there opportunities to grow further? Absolutely, because there are certain things like payroll. You can't have a payroll that works like 25% or 50%. Has to work end to end 100%. But then there are some other areas where we can incrementally deliver value.
Yeah, right. That's a great answer. The bot thing that you said, I think is that's going to be the future of how people explore data, right? All these building screens, pages and pages of reports, I think is past its prime, I think. And when people can ask questions and get answers, they just like it. I mean, certainly, when you want trends and stuff, you need to chart.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And I think, like, the way, Pradeep, 100% agree with you. The way I think about the future of SaaS, and I know a lot of people are saying SaaS is dead, and they might not be completely wrong in that. Because if you think about SaaS today, right, we moved from the desktop applications,
Yeah.
which were very heavy, run by people or humans, and then we kind of moved that to cloud, right? So the whole idea of hosting your own infrastructure went away. Web became very popular. There were background jobs running. People can log in from anywhere. Then came the whole mobile trend where the applications became very responsive. But end of the day, they're still very, very human driven applications. So for example, salespeople come and use Salesforce. That's the primary tool they use actually, right? Same thing with SmartLink, same thing with any other software. Like, it is driven by humans. It's a 9 to 5 job for people to use that software. Now there is automation. Don't take me wrong, that we send the emails, send reminders, we send text messages. But I do believe with AI, that curve is going to change, where software is working for the humans. So it is telling me, I'm going to make this decision on your behalf. Are you okay with that? And I'll approve it. And as they start making the decision, it will lead to enough trust where I will kind of let the software make the decision. And I might just need mostly acknowledgements that this job has been done, or some minimal UI where I can go and see what has been done on my behalf. So I do see that shift happening over the course of next few years in the software industry. And then comes the pricing piece. If AI is going to do the work for us, what
Yeah.
does that mean per user licenses? Is it more AI agent driven cost, or is it per user? Because it doesn't matter if I have 10 schedulers. If if the schedulers are just acknowledging the decisions being made, and ultimately they stop acknowledging the decisions, then it just changes the whole pricing structure for a lot of companies, which I believe is still early innings for a lot of companies to figure that out. So there is going to be fundamental shift in how the software is being built and how it gets rolled out. In my opinion, it's going to be less data entry but more decision making, and some data entry as well. So it will be very interesting next few years.
Yeah. I guess that naturally leads to the next question, which is what is in tech that excites you most at this point in time?
So I think, like, we are all very excited about the AI piece. Like, I've yet to meet somebody who's not excited, but I also believe, how AI agents
Yeah.
um, can replace some of the stuff that we do as humans, and slowly build the trust. Now, a lot of people think that AI agents, like, a lot of people are treating AI agents more as a jobs that happen behind the scene. Actually, there are very few companies I've seen who have built AI agents which are thinking like a human, and then making taking a decision like a human will do. Actually, sending an email through AI agent, using OpenAI LLMs to generate the text is nothing wrong with that, but that's not still making a decision actually. And I think that's where I believe AI agents will evolve, and they are already evolving. Like, for example, in the scheduling, like, if somebody calls sick last minute, right, how do an AI agent look at past data,
Mm.
think about the credentials of an employee that needs to fill the shift, what type of shift it is, how far the employee lives, and then kind of make a decision just like a human will make, and then notify that employee that you can come and fill the shift. I think that will be a game changer for us in the scheduling industry. And same thing with time and attendance, right? Like, if you look at time and attendance, people are still using punch in, punch out. Now what if you stand in the front of a camera and there is a detection of the human, and the automatically a punch in punch out happens? Or maybe there is no need for punch in punch out. As you walk into the building and you're looking at the cameras, a lot of things are automatically delivered. So I think that's where a lot of things in our industry can be automated. Same thing with payroll. Like, you know um, like, how do you automatically calculate the tax? So the world relies on Smith tree right now to calculate payroll taxes. How can those things slowly evolve, where there is enough data that I am living in California, I'm married, like, my taxes are just calculated and then paid. So that's another area where I believe lot of innovation still needs to happen. So that's how I'm thinking. That's what excites me, overall. And I think the financial industry will be another interesting one of how things will evolve over the course of time. I'm also very curious how Google will, you know, challenge OpenAI in in the LLM space, and how what will be the future of search will look like. So those are some of the things that I'm very excited about.
Yeah. Google has had a deep investment in these areas for probably almost a decade and a half or longer. So I think they are very well positioned to bring out. I mean, they've wowed the world with the video generation, right? The quality of the video generation. So, and I just discovered the other day they just made the AI mode live in search. So
Okay.
you get the overview, AI overview, and then at the bottom it says switch to AI mode, so you can explore deeper and ask questions. So I see how like very simply they're blending the UI. So you're still going to the same source, but the interaction ends up being different based on
Yeah.
what you're asking. So
No, I am very bullish on Google, like always, but I also think they have a big shoes to fill right now,
yeah,
because their whole domination has been kind of a little bit shaken right now.
for sure.
Like if I remember, like Google has like $180 billion of search revenue, which is going to be interesting how they solve those
Yeah,
problems, over the course of next very, very quickly. Um, so yeah, so I saw that AI mode. I haven't spent a lot of time. I think they just came out with that
yeah,
very, very recently, so
yeah,
but it'll be interesting, how they recover from this.
yeah. And I don't know if they've done a full rollout, right? They might be exposing it to certain users, so
Mhm.
it's be possible. I just saw this over the weekend, so I didn't see
Yeah.
it before that. So it's a
Yeah, I
pretty new.
think that I think another example, Pradeep, from the AI agent perspective might be like, if you think about like some of the stuff that I've been thinking is like booking.com, for example, or kayak or expedia.com. Now imagine, OpenAI comes up with a marketplace where you have these agents actually. So you want to book a ticket, you know, the
Yeah,
agent can pretty much do the whole work for you. Like I won't be surprised if companies like booking.com or kayak or Expedia has their own agents. And as we discussed earlier, the whole idea of UI based interaction starts slowly
definitely.
going away, where I tell my needs to an AI agent, like a booking.com agent, and that takes care of my needs and requirement and is in touch with me as it is doing the job. Now, just like a human, right? So if you talk with a
Yeah,
travel agent, they are doing the job, but they're also keeping you updated. So I do believe like there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done in having very specific dedicated AI agents, and that can also change the whole future of how these companies operate. Actually, right now they're very web driven.
yeah,
They were previously human driven. We can still call a human and they can help, like you call United customer service. But I think there will be definitely, it will be interesting how this evolve into either a marketplace, or these companies have their AI driven agents which are doing end to end work for you behind the scene. Obviously, there's magic behind the scene that is happening, so.
yeah, for sure. So now in product and engineering, how do you see AI getting used? Have you been using anything so far?
Yes, yes, yes. So I think the whole product and engineering will be done is being done, already being done in a very different fashion. So we work with a couple of companies. They're based in Europe. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So we are basically doing our new UI development purely through AI, where we have a Figma designs
Mm,
and we can generate the React components without anybody writing a lot of code. Like we use Replit or V0, and then we kind of stitch them together actually. So that's one example where, as we modernize our platform, we are relying on the AI. We also use, our development team members also use Codex from ChatGPT.
yeah,
We also use Claude. They're all part of we can switch these models from Copilot. So that is helping us a lot, especially our team members. Then very recently we started using this QA tool called qa.tech. So the good thing with qa.tech is I met their founder. Recently we agreed to work together. So you can just give a prompt. Like, let's say you want to add a new employee. So you can basically say add a new employee, and QA.tech will write all the test cases for you in natural language and make sure you are able to add an employee, and it will verify that. So it basically takes a prompt and then it uses visual AI to figure out where the button is on the page. It will decide, it will come up with the next step. And in few minutes you will have all your test cases written, not in Selenium, nothing fancy. You can change the div tags, or you can change the expect expression, but it will write the test cases for you in plain English, and then you can run it basically. So we found that very, very easy, where we don't need to hire QA developers who know Selenium. We don't need massive infrastructure. QA.tech provides that. And the best part on top of that is you can organize your test cases. It will also recommend you new test cases as it becomes more educated about your system. So these are a couple of examples which I believe is going to change the way we do hiring, the way how big our teams are. As I said, I already believe in working in small teams, and I think this can further change. um, I do see some opportunities in the DevOps side where, we use Terraform for creating our infrastructure. I do see some opportunities where AI can create the right amount of infrastructure for you based on your document or your plain English, and then it spins it up and kind of set it up for you based on what is needed. So I'm not sure if anybody's doing that, but it is already impacting the way we build our software and
That's
also
cool.
how we fix our bugs actually.
Yeah. No, that's great. I'm sure Terraform might think about coming up with something like that where, you specify and it just builds and rolls it out. This topic of hiring, what do you think of the state of hiring right now in tech? And do you
Yeah.
think there's anything missing or things could be better? Or you're satisfied with how things are working?
So, so I haven't, we have been hiring, um, but at this time we've kind of paused the hiring just to understand, the need of our teams and our company as we move forward, right? Like we have around, as I said, like 50 plus folks that, you know, are our engineers and developers. And for now, we kind of pause the hiring so that we can understand these tools and really understand the success out of this tool and how many people really we need as we move forward. And also, we are acquiring new companies. We recently acquired two new companies, so that is also kind of helping us understand the needs of our business as we move forward. But I going back to your question, Pradeep, I do believe that we'll be probably hiring more seasoned
Mm,
folks rather than entry level folks, so that we can have like AI help a more seasoned professional do more. But at the same time, the challenge I have seen is a lot of seasoned folk who has been in the industry for a long time. A lot of them are not up to speed with the new modern technologies. Whereas when I go to Urbana Champaign or University of Wisconsin or Purdue, I'm able to find a lot of fresh graduates who are much more well versed in these technologies, but at the same time they don't know the design patterns and the architecture
right.
behind it. And I think that's probably where ultimately we'll find a decent balance, where we have people who we have developers who are well aware of how the AI is working and the tools that we can use, but also understand the the technology behind it, right? It's basically, the car is driving for you, but you still need to know what is making it drive. Now, sure, from the car perspective, it is simple enough, but when you're reviewing the code that AI generates, or when you're fixing a bug, you still need to know the mechanics behind it actually. So I think that's where we have to find the right balance, where there is experience, but there is also hunger and curiosity to learn new stuff. uh, so I think that's probably where we will lean more towards, somewhere in the middle actually.
Okay, good. Fascinating that you've seen that pattern with some experienced folks. And also your solution of how you're planning to solve that seems like a good one. So,
Yeah, the reason is, like, in our industry, like payroll, right? So payroll has been around for a very, very long period of time, right? So there are a lot of payroll companies out there, and a lot of people have been working in the space for a long time. So you always run into folks who have been doing the same thing in the
Mhm.
same way for many, many years. And, they're kind of a little bit out of touch with the way new development is going to be done or is being done actually. So I think that's what I've noticed based on conversation with some of the folks. And when you go to these when you talk with the new kids coming straight from school, they have a very different way of doing things actually. They will go to ChatGPT, put their GitHub repository and say, okay, go and find all the bugs for me and fix it. And there you go. So I think that the truth lies somewhere in the middle where you have, you know, the people are using Codex to fix your bugs, but also you're kind of reviewing to make sure like, okay,
Yeah,
is it being done in a proper fashion, even though that means you're just kind of reviewing the code and then creating a pull request and get it done.
right. Yeah. So switching topics a little bit more towards like leadership and personal insights from leadership. In your long experience being a leader, were there missteps that you had personally, experienced or seen, and how did you recover from it? What did
Yeah,
you?
like a lot of missteps, right? Like taking a big project to break a monolith into microservices,
Hmm.
uh, and then never completing it. I think that was something that kind of was something that I learned hard way. Um,
So how did
and
how did you recover from that? Something like that. Like how
so
how
yeah,
did you manage the stakeholders and stuff in that
yeah.
sense?
So I think you basically put a bet and you say, okay, we're gonna get this thing done in 6 months, and 4 months, 5 months into it, you know you're kind of still sitting there, and in some cases you might just have to scrap the bet actually. You might not just deliver anything and say, you know what, we made a mistake. This is too big of a puzzle to be solved actually. Maybe it is okay for this to be monolith. Um, and and in some cases, we did spend a lot of time, like, we had a big monolith database. We started breaking it into smaller pieces. um, but then there were a lot of stored procedures, and
Yes.
we all know how hard it is to
Yeah.
dissect those stored procedures and understand it. So it was kind of after a few months we said, you know what, it's not worth it. We might be better off just rewriting the whole thing from scratch, and that's what we did actually. And also the whole definition of monolith to microservices change over the course of time. Like the microservices is probably a very poorly named term in my opinion. It gives people a
Mm.
wrong notion. Microservices can be mini monoliths or even
Oh yeah.
monoliths, and they can interact with each other. So I think those were a couple of things that we made a mistake. We took a system which was old, outdated, and tried to fix it, and instead we should have just basically rewrite pieces of it from scratch, again keeping customer in the front, much simpler UI, more modern architecture, and scale that. And then
So would you
Mhm.
say, like in this specific instance, it was the humility to say that, hey, that bet I made didn't work. I'm going to now take a different approach and move forward rather than trying to go further in that direction. Is that the way you recovered from it? I would say.
Yeah, absolutely, that's how we exactly recovered. Like this is not going to be done in 5 6 months that we initially committed, right? And so so that's how we recovered. We basically took a different approach, which was more incremental approach, working within the same platform. you know this reminds me, Pradeep, of a strangler fig pattern, where you kind of build a new tree and then start retiring the old one. And I think this has worked very well in some cases, in many cases for us. Like, I'll give you another example of migrating all our users into Azure B2C or Auth 0 when we were maintaining all of them in our internal database. So, so the, so I think that those were some of the lessons learned. And life is not never going to be perfect. So it's okay to acknowledge it early on and
Mhm.
say, you know what, after 4 months, this is going to be a 2-year project, and it's not going to be done. And we should kind of revisit the drawing board and see how this is done. Now, I think this is where some of the lessons learned, that's why I like Shape Up so much, because you're kind of spending more time upfront, and some of these things happen 4 or 5 months because we didn't spend enough time as a team thinking about the challenges and the assumptions we are making. and all those things actually, and not spending enough time understanding the complexity behind it. Had we done that, maybe we would have scrapped this off right in first few weeks itself based on the planning and the discussion. So I think that's where we change our style of development, where we are kind of relying more on upfront planning, to the best of our ability, and then making the decision. And that's where, I love Bezos' model, where he has the 6 pager, and then if you're all aligned, you make a commit. And Amazon has also failed even after that, but the point is, it gives you enough thought process and enough awareness, including the stakeholders, that you're making a much more calculated bet rather than just going with a lot of unknowns and assumptions.
Yeah.
And then I think I also believe hiring is very important. We have, in my career, we hired some folks that didn't work out for us, and sometimes it's good to continue to give them opportunity. In some cases, you cut your losses. So I think that's how we have recovered in some cases, and in some cases we have not, and we paid the price for that as well.
Got it. Okay. Well, that is certainly very insightful, and the ability to recover from a bet is like one of the harder things for a leader to do. So it was good to hear how you went about it. Now, on to the next question. So, for somebody that is starting out in engineering, and I remember that your own sons are in the engineering field, software engineering, right? So, what's an advice that you would give for somebody that's starting out as engineers or consider software development as a career?
Yeah. So here is my thought about engineering. I think when I came to US, my circumstances, situation was very different actually. So my suggestion to new engineers is think from customer perspective. Think about the problem you're solving. I do believe very strongly that there will be technology, through AI, and people coming from good schools will know how to build it. But I think a lot of people don't recognize the challenges a customer faces, or the problem there are out there to solve actually, and it's not always very complicated, right? Like, you should have a vision and you execute that, but start putting yourself in customer shoes, acknowledge those problems and start building it. And then the second thing, and whether you work for a software company or you work for yourself, like, if you think from a customer perspective, you will go long way in your career, because you're solving the right problem, and at a very young age you are putting your thought process you know in a different fashion from the product perspective and customer perspective rather than technology perspective. And I think the second thing is take more risk, be an entrepreneur. In today's time, it is much more easier to become an entrepreneur than it used to be 10, 15, 20 years back. I think with a lot of these technologies, you don't need a whole lot of money and resources to build a good product if you have a vision to do it, and then scale it as you learn more. So I think those are the two advice that I have. Like, take more risk. There are a lot of opportunities out there. Once you get stuck to the paycheck, you're kind of stuck in that mode actually. You need to break that cycle. So
Yeah, that's very good advice. That the best time to take risk is early on in your career, right?
yes.
Because there's very little at stake. The financial footprint is pretty small. And like you said, the tech stack is so different now that you could build a lot more with a lot less.
Exactly. And with cloud, you don't need a whole lot of money actually to run a
Right.
basic idea or a prototype or even a full product. So I think the times have changed, and you don't need a big team of developers to build the idea. A lot of solutioning can still be done by AI.
Yeah.
There are a lot of good coding engines out there now. So I personally think this is probably one of the best time, at least what I've seen, is to be an entrepreneur, um, and take that risk and be successful.
Right. So now, for somebody that is, say, mid-career, say somebody is like a principal engineer or a senior engineer, and they're looking into a management track, right? What would you give as an advice for them?
Yeah. So a couple of things for, I still think like the same advice applies to anybody, who at different stage of their career, like, um, being an entrepreneur, there is always opportunities. I don't know if age is a barrier, but for folks who have been in the industry for a long time, my advice is very simple. drive more action, so drive more, like, so for example, take more stuff away from your boss or your leader, and drive that as much as to the best of your ability, be that customer voice in the room from the technology perspective or the product perspective, and represent that person in the room. And I think that will just change the way, as I said earlier, that will just bring a different thought process, and you will be still focused on technology, but the way you solution your technology solutions will be very different, like where to scale, how much to scale. Those answers will be very different, Pradeep, because we talked about scalability, right? You don't need whole lot of scalability if you are going to have like only an employee with 20 a customer with 20 employees max. So you're kind of building a different solution. So that's what my advice will be try to still be an entrepreneur, take more stuff away from your leader, own it, drive more action, and then be the voice of the customer, and kind of still keep the things very simple.
Yeah. So now that you covered for early employees, mid career, what do you say for like executives, right? People that are already in leadership roles. Back then we used to have headhunters, and now I don't think that genre exists as much. Now, how do you get found? From your own experience, how have you been able to get found by the next? Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's a very good question, Pradeep. Uh, it goes this goes back like how visible you are, right? Like, if you're working for a very big company, and you kind of grinding through within the company, then you don't have visibility outside that. Like, are you writing some blogs? Are you writing on medium.com? Are you How actively you're present on LinkedIn? Um, so a lot of time I do believe, it might not be a bad idea to become an advisor or mentor certain organization at a very young, who are very organized at a very young, actually, or be the voice to a specific technology. I see a lot of people writing their newsletter and building that visibility. So there are many different ways to do this, and I think it is important to do that. Otherwise, you will be one executive kind of buried, unless and until you are working for a company which is very, very visible. And but even for that, you still have to be visible yourself, to be the voice. So that's how I look at this. And own become a sub expert in a space you love, actually, right? Like, it doesn't have to be the same space where your company, but it should be, and that's how you can bring your expertise, your knowledge, your wisdom in front, and lead from the front, actually. So those are a couple of things. Worst case scenario, try something different. Like, as I said early on, even an executive can do it. Like, like, if you've worked in a specific industry for last 2-3 decades, you know that space very well, and there are always opportunities in that space. How can you flip the coin from the SaaS world to more AI driven world, actually, and so I think that same thing applies to an executive, at a different level. um, but you need to do that um, effort to be more visible, in my opinion. And visibility doesn't mean going to different events and just hanging out and having drinks, which is fine. But at the same time, like, what are you contributing towards the
Absolutely.
the technology area? Like, you know I remember, there are certain areas of passion I had, so I wrote a couple of Medium articles. I need to find time to do that, but again, time is an excuse. Finding time is an excuse. So you need to find your passion and kind of become an expert in that area. It can be anything, actually, but you have to make that effort in order to get out there. Never be satisfied, because otherwise you'll become obsolete.
Right. That's great. Thank you for that. So now, in fun and closing, some questions that are not necessarily tech or industry specific, more like of a personal nature. What is a skill or interest outside of tech that has helped you become an engineer and the leader you are today?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things, like, I listen to a lot of different podcasts, I listen to a lot of different folks. So there is a podcast like Risk Reversal, which helps me kind of see where the market is. where the market trends are, and then listening to a lot of different books actually, over the course of time, like outliers, like constantly listening, constantly learning from other folks when I'm working out has helped me become more knowledgeable about how other people think. Like, for example, there's a very popular book like 10x action or something like that. I don't have the exact name, I can find it, Pradeep, but the author talks about driving action. So for example, he says when salespeople miss their quotas, sure, we can say the market situation is bad, the economy is not doing great, but then they need to drive the same number of actions, more number of actions, so that if they need 10 leads, then they need to get 20 or 30 leads to meet their sales number. So I think listening to a lot of different folks in the industry, you know, writing sometimes, and then listening to different podcasts have helped me get myself up to speed with a lot of different things actually, and also see the industry trend where the technology is heading and all that.
Great. Is 10x Action one by Grant Cardone or something?
Yes, that
Okay.
is, you got it. That why I think that's a pretty inspiring book, and kind of makes you think, what Grant is very much right. Like, it's sure there's always going to be opportunities, we are all humans and there will be time when we slow down, but don't blame other people, blame yourself, because you need to do more things, and it's easy to blame on other folks actually. No matter what happens, you own your own destiny and you need to drive more action to be successful. Now there will be a situation when it is somebody else's fault, it's not your fault, but again, there are stuff that is beyond you, you cannot control it, so don't get emotional about it. So that's a very, very good book that I listened, and I was very impressed by it. I also like Satya Nadella's book, he wrote, which was very inspiring for me, like how he came along and over his journey over last 2 decades and how he transformed Microsoft into where it is right now. So I think those are the things that we can all learn from the industry leaders and pioneers.
Absolutely. Great. So now, if you weren't in tech, what different career might you have pursued and why?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, actually. But I've been thinking about it. So one of the things that I think I will do is I'll probably become a chef, because I think I enjoy cooking. I started cooking in 2012, and it has been very good for me. I've kind of a stress buster. I enjoy cooking. Sometimes I do try to get a little bit too particular or perfectionist in that whole cooking, which leads to frustration. But I think that will be something that I think I can do that. Also, I think if I was not in the software industry, I would have been probably a travel agent or a guide, because I love to travel, and showing people around different places, taking care of them would have been a lot of fun actually. So those are the two things I can think of, and maybe financial advisor also. So but these are the things that I've kind of evolved in last 10, 15 years. Um, so I think all these three areas are a lot of fun for me.
Fantastic. Cooking, that's great. Yeah, I don't cook as much, but when I do cook, it used to be a time where I used to spend quite a bit of time cooking. But yeah, it's just a fascinating thing to be able to bring a meal together, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I remember when I started cooking, I ordered the first thing I ordered was a bunch of knives, learned how to cut onions, like why your eyes get watery when you cut onion, like the where the acid is, so you avoid that area. So there is always a science behind everything you do. And I think that's where my wife was not very happy about how detailed I was going. She said, just cut the onion, it's okay, wipe your eyes. So 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 I think that's the engineering part that comes into you, like, okay, why is this, like, why you cry, because there is an acid in the root of the onions, so if you avoid that, you will never get watery eyes. So
Oh wow, that's fascinating. I've heard that you can keep like a wet paper cloth or something to
yeah.
absorb it, but I didn't know that you can just cut that part. So maybe that's like an interesting thing. Have you always been that kind of person where you try to like understand everything that you're doing,
Well,
the why of it?
well,
Like this
not.
onion example, right? Like I'm just curious. Like
Yeah, so I think like one of the things with me is like when I try to do something, I definitely try to dig deeper to see, how to cut a bell pepper, for example, right? So like when you are cutting the bell pepper, your knife has a tendency to slip because the outside of the bell pepper is soft. So that kind of, brought curiosity, like, what is the best way to cut a bell pepper? Now, these are all small things. Like, for
sure,
example, when you cut a tomato, right? you cut a tomato, and then all of a sudden, when you start cutting tomato too small, it's all watery, and then you kind of lose control of the tomato after a while. So those
Yeah.
are the things that triggered me. You know what? Like maybe I should read or watch a YouTube video of how to cut a tomato, because like every time I cut a tomato, I do a good job to some extent, and then after that it's all watery and it's all kind of all over the place. And same thing with bell pepper, my knife keeps on slipping. So those are some of the things that when you keep on doing it and you say like, what the hell I'm doing wrong here, and then you go and watch it, and then you start doing it in a better way, actually. So again, not day one that I'm curious about cutting an onion, but after doing it a few times, and when you still keep on screwing up, then you say, you know what, let me read about it, or watch a YouTube video about it.
That's great. That's great. I think that's a very fantastic trait to have, right? Where you're trying something a few times or doing something, and then you want to perfect it. I think that just is a trait that I think helps with any activity. So
Any activity. Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
And now, like, how has your career in tech influenced your personal life?
Yeah, I think a lot. Like both my kids, Pradeep, as you mentioned, both of them are in technology. My older son, he graduated last year from Urbana in computer science. He's working for Amazon, and my younger one is doing computer science in the same school. So both of them have been heavily influenced by me, and I've kind of also influenced them in some ways that they got influenced. So yeah, so it has been a very good ride so far, and it has had made a lot of impact personally on my life and career, and same thing with my kids. So it will be interesting to see how these guys do over the course of next decade or 2 decades, where the industry takes them.
Yeah,
But that's where they are right now.
cool. So, did you actually like mentor your kids in terms of computer programming and things like that, or how did you shape their interest? I guess,
Yeah. So
or
I
was
think
it just from watching you
I
be a
think some of that watching me, but at the same time, I think, you know, um, one of the things was like kind of being creative, building something which people can use, people can feel and touch. I think that's one part of it. And then the other part was the excitement, like when I used to work in Chicago downtown, our office was very, very fancy office. And they will come to me and they will be like wowed by how cool the office space is. And they said like, Dad, we need to be in the same industry as you are, so we can have the same fancy offices. Like, so I think they were kind of influenced by some of that, plus building good product, which can affect a lot of people. So that kind of drove them into this industry. Yeah, but again, I didn't taught them a lot of programming languages. They learn a lot of stuff on their own. Whenever they will have a question, they will ask me. But they were very self-driven overall, in driving this. Now, one of my son also wanted to become a doctor, but then, when he started thinking about blood and surgeries, he kind of moved away from that.
That's great. So they had the raw interest or ability, and you provided the inspiration. Like it.
Yeah, yes, and I think the hard part for them was like they wanted to go to one of the best schools to do it, and being in Illinois, it's still much more easier to get into Urbana-Champaign, which is one of the top schools. So I think that kind of further triggered their desire and motivated them to do this. So,
Fantastic. So, is there a question you wish I had asked you today? And if so, what is it?
Pradeep, let me think about this. There's a question. I think you covered quite a bit of good ground,
Yeah.
Pradeep. I think the question will be like, where do you think, if I have to ask, where do you think the world will be in 20 years from now? That'll be a that'll be
Yeah.
a good question. That'll
Yeah.
be a good
Let's do
question.
that. Let's do that. So,
Yeah,
where will the world be in 20 years from what you?
yeah. I think the world will be. I personally think the world will be much better place. If you think about where we were 50 or 100 years back and where we are right now, people are living longer lives. you know People have more money than they ever had in the past. Overall, in the globe, the quality of life has become better, in my opinion. More better health coverage, like much more quicker diagnosis. So I believe that trend will continue over the course of next couple of decades. We'll probably be in space, like maybe in Mars, in next 20 years, 30 years. We already have robo taxis. Most of the world will probably build new infrastructure, uh, for driving self-driving cars. I'm not really sure. I'm not still sold on the idea that you can have the self-driving car and a human-driven car in the same lane, especially when you have a lot more of these cars. So I do believe that there will be a need for a separate infrastructure. Going back to horses riding on the same roads that we are, we can't drive the cars on the roads where horses used to run. All right, so a lot of stuff will, like humans. So if you think about it, right, people were um, people were doing things at a much slower pace. The scale was not there, right? Now then, over the course of last 2 decades, we are doing a lot more things in our daily life. Even if a lot of people are addicted by reels and YouTube shorts, they're always busy with doing something. So I believe like that trend will continue, but a lot of stuff will be driven by AI overall. And you probably will have less UI, as we discussed, less things to navigate. So those are a couple of things, Pradeep, I can think of right now. But I'm very bullish on the idea that the world will be a much better place uh, overall to live.
I agree. Yeah, I think one of the things I feel like AI is going to help is a lot more entrepreneurship, like you said, right?
Yes.
So if, from somebody having an idea to execution, I think it's going to be fewer number of people involved and more tools to help build that. Now, then it becomes a question of how do you stand out?
Yes, exactly. No, I think because that's a good point, because the old school model is you need certain amount of capital to hire people, hire some, have a team, build it. So, and I think going back to the question of advice to young engineers, do not forget your coding skills, or do not forget the foundational pieces
Yeah.
that will help you learn how AI is writing code, and what's the and how do you run the business actually. So there will be tools, much more easier tools to drive it, but end of the day, you still control a lot of that
Yeah.
yourself. Like, how do you stand out, right? So I think some of those things will be there. Now 20 years from now, it will be very interesting. I also believe that the government will be paying a lot of people,
Mm.
a monthly universal salary or something like that, because it's hard for me to imagine, with all these innovations, how will everybody find a job actually.
Right.
There are like 8 billion people in the world actually, right? And it's not going to be possible for everybody to have a job. So I also think government will be taxing these AI agents or robots working in warehouses of Amazon and other big companies, just like they tax humans, and taking that money and paying people who will not be able to find a job. That's going to be the new reality of the world, probably, if not right now, maybe a decade from now. So what those people do actually, and how does the humanity continues to evolve, is going to be very interesting. I don't know, but I can clearly see a universal income to some extent coming. And I also think Google and Apple, it will be interesting to see if they become the IBMs of the world, or they are the growth story like they have been for last 2 3 decades. So it'll be interesting.
Fantastic. Well, Amber, it's been a real pleasure. It's been very insightful. Thank you for taking the time to come on the episode. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Pradeep. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Okay. Bye. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this episode insightful. Join me for the next episode in 2 weeks where I interview another guest.